Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we're back. We're here again with another video. We are now midway through the second round. We got a couple of series look like that they're getting ready to wrap up. A couple of series where they're still in the balance. So we'll go over the games that we saw as of, I guess, Saturday. You're probably watching this not on Saturday, but we'll start with Pistons Cavs, right? Because that was probably the best one, I think, of the two, right? With the Cavs down 0-2, losing the first two in Detroit. So now you're kind of thinking, all right, what do the Cavs do? They're at home through the first two games because I picked Cleveland in 7. I thought Cleveland's offense would be a problem I thought Cleveland's offense would be an issue for Detroit, right? Where like in the first round, Detroit's playing Orlando, big physical team that can guard them. Yeah, they have multiple shot creators and playmakers, but that was not like an offensive oriented series, right? Like neither team was shooting the ball all that well, but there was a lot of physicality in there. Whereas with the Cavs against Toronto, right, part of the issue for Cleveland in some of those games was the Raptors would go small. They play a more switchy lineup where it's like Colin Murray, Boyles, basically playing small ball center. And so they're switching everything, making it tough for the Cavs guards. But through the first two games, right, I was really impressed by what the Pistons did in terms of both ends of the floor, right? Because on defense, they're doing what they're normally doing. Harden had a really rough first couple of games, right, where he's just turning the ball over, can't really get to his spots comfortably, can't get past his defenders. Even Mitchell, right, like was putting up some numbers, but it was all really tough, difficult shots, right? It's the type of shots where you live with it if you're the Detroit defense, right? And then even the bigs, right, where it's like one or the other, right? Like in the first game, Allen was in foul trouble early, right? You know, Mobley has had stretches in the game, right? But it seemed like you just couldn't get both of them together, right? Where they're usually better when like one's off and then the other's on. And then it seemed like they couldn't really figure out who the starting wing is, right? Because like Dean Wade starting, I guess, guarding Cade, but then there's stretches where offensively he's just not giving you anything. And in game 3, it changed, right? Because the Cavs offensively early on, funny enough, they weren't missing and it didn't matter because one of the things I've actually liked about the Pistons offensively in this series is some of the stuff they're doing to free open a guy like a Duncan Robinson, right? Tobias Harris attacking mismatches. Asar Thompson using him like a big, right? Where he's rolling to the rim, acting in dribble handoffs. He's not just kind of standing around. He had a couple of shots in this game in game 3 where he was just spotting up in the corner and it didn't really go that well. But either way, I've actually liked how they've done that. Jenkins was minus 28 in game 3. But prior to that, I've actually liked his minutes where he's with Cade a lot, where he's kind of able to just play off of him and act as like, okay, we have another ball handler out there next to Cade. Whereas like early on in the playoffs, he was just by himself, right? Where it's like he's just kind of out there when Cade's not out there, and it didn't really work that great. And even Duran, right, like defensively in the first 2 games was fine, but game 3 was rough because the Cavs actually early on their offense was cooking, but they were still down, which was kind of concerning because, like I said, that's what I thought was going to be the key for the Cavs in this series. And then eventually in the second quarter, they went on a huge run and pushed the lead to double digits, right? By the time he got to the end of the first half, right, I believe the score was 64-48 in favor of Cleveland. Mobley got a dunk. The bigs kind of got rolling at the end of the second quarter. Then in the third quarter, right, the Cavs pushed the lead to 17, right, because Mobley and Mitchell score a couple of buckets. Cade had a rough first half. And then in the second half, right, the Pistons slowly but surely start chipping away. The crowd for the Cavs in Cleveland goes really quiet. And by the time you get to the end of the third quarter, right, I think the Pistons actually briefly took the lead because Paul Reed got a putback and the Cavs lead was completely erased, right? Then Cunningham had some rough turnovers again in this game. He had 8. And then the Cavs were able to go up by 5 with a minute to go. Then they went up by 7, right? Because Mitchell had a mini takeover towards the end of the third. Then a couple of awful plays by Cleveland, right? Where Harris gets an and one. And then Jalen Tyson throws away the ball on the inbounds and Harris scores again to get it to a 2-point game. Fourth quarter was great. Back and forth action between both teams in terms of the shot making. Harden finally came to play, right? In the fourth quarter of this game, I believe he had 9 points. In game one, he had a stretch in the fourth quarter where he got them back into the game. And that was kind of the one thing where if you're the Cavs, you were kind of looking at it, whereas, hey, as bad as the first two games went, we lost both of those games basically by double digits. We were in both of those games in the fourth quarter in Detroit. But the problem for the Cavs is they have not won a road game so far in the playoffs, right? And, Harden hit some big shots to close it out. Hit a couple of step backs, got a floater, got a step back three at the end. So they ended up winning 116-109. But and they're still down 2-1 in this series. So if they're going to win the series, problem is once you're down 2-0, you have to win 4 out of 5. Does this team have what it takes to be able to turn it around? It feels like they have the talent, but it was pretty concerning that there was a stretch in this game where it looked like the Cavs could potentially lose, even with the shot making. They shot for the game 58% from the field, 37.5 from three. They missed a ton of free throws. They shot 64%, 18 of 28 from the line. They had 15 turnovers compared to Detroit had 15 turnovers. They shot 45% from the field, 36 from three, 9 for 25 though. That was the thing for Detroit in the first couple of games. Their three-point shot was working really well. So maybe that's kind of the Achilles heel for Detroit. Maybe that comes back down to earth. But even in this game, it was like Robinson was 4 for 7 from 3, Harris was 2 for 3. And then after that, Jenkins was 0 for 3. Javonte Green was 1 for 4. Thompson was 0 for 2. Cunningham was 2 for 6. Cunningham had a big fourth quarter. Just the 8 turnovers were a killer. He had 10 rebounds, 10 assists. He had been the best player through the first 2 games of the series. Mitchell was the best player in the game, and that's probably where it tilts. If you can get a big Mitchell game, if Harden can play better, and these other guys like the bigs, if they can actually make their mark, they might be able to come back. But right now, it just feels like it's a tall task because they're still going to have to go in Detroit and win at least one. And like I said, I picked the Cavs in 7. We'll see if they pull it off. But, that game 3 was a real struggle where it felt like that they were going to run away with it, and they almost blew it. So that's kind of concerning because they other than the first 2 games in the playoffs, they really haven't looked that amazing. Even in this game, like I said, with all the shot making, they had to dig deep to pull it out. So maybe Detroit just didn't have it in this game, but I did like some of the adjustments Cleveland made, and Sam Merrill played more because he was hurt in the first game. But I don't know, you got to do something I think about Wade because it just feels like you don't have to start him. Not that he can't play because he can guard Cade I guess at times, but I don't know. Atkinson's got some work to do.
Yeah, I think this is one of the more interesting series, mainly because both these teams are kind of coming out of series that they should have handled, I think, with a little bit more ease. Granted, I did pick Magic in 7 or whatever, but we all know how that turned out. In this series, I ended up picking Detroit in 7. I think it was either 6 or 7. I can't remember from the stream, but I do have Detroit coming out of this one. But for Cleveland, shout out to them for actually getting a win, right? Because they didn't really look too good, I think, in the first couple of games, like you were talking about. Underwhelming performances, especially from James Harden. That doesn't help. And then, like you said, the Dean Wade factor, Donovan Mitchell, high-volume player, but just not really enough to get over that hump, especially considering the great defensive identity that the Detroit Pistons have. And, these two teams are a completely different look compared to the other teams that they face in the first round. So it is a bit of adjustment. I think we expected these two teams to look a little different compared to the previous series, and I think that's kind of been the case so far. Like, I like what Detroit's been doing, right? Obviously it's a lot of Cade, as it should be, right? Because he's one of the only creators on this team. But yeah, getting guys like Tobias Harris, Duncan Robinson involved, and I think they really need to find a way to, have Jalen Duren and Cade Cunningham be the centerpiece of the offense and not just have Jalen Duren, fade when the role's not there. So, I like the fact that they're getting, different actions for different guys. That's going to open up, I think, the playbook for this team and what, they can do offensively. Because once Cade gets other guys going and he's going, I think this team is one of the best in the league. Obviously, that's why they won 60 games.
Right.
And that's kind of why I picked them. I thought that their defensive identity would translate into offense. In game 3, kinda, like you said, Cavs almost blew it. But, for a series, I think Detroit still got this one. And, I think it just starts with Cade, and it's going to end with, their defense as well. And I just don't think Cleveland has the firepower or the depth to really, fight back in this one, especially if the bigs are going to play like that,
Yeah.
wishy-washy up and down, then Dean Wade and not having like a true wing. Granted, you don't really need a wing to take a lot of these guys out of the game. Like nobody's really worried about an Asar Thompson offensively. You definitely are worried about him defensively. But, there's just so many factors where I think this is a weird matchup for Cleveland, specifically. On paper, I think they should be winning this,
Yeah.
technically, because you do have a phenomenal double big lineup. You have a very potent offensive backcourt, but it's just that wing position where I just don't really see, them having a clear cut advantage, especially on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, like that's the thing is Mitchell had 35 and 10 rebounds, shot 54 from the field. Harden had 19 and 7. And then Allen had 18, only 4 rebounds, but still plus 3. And then
Mm-hmm.
Mobley had 13 and 8 and was plus 9, right? So it's like 4 of your 5 starters all played pretty well. You got Schroeder who gave you 11 off the bench. Merrill had 7, hit some really tough shots in the second half. But it's just rough. But like I said, that's credit to Detroit because that's the thing is like you got to give the Pistons credit for how the first 3 games have gone because they've been the better team. And like I said, could have easily stolen. Well, I don't even want to say stolen. Could have easily won this game because this was starting to get reminiscent of the game 6 against Orlando. Not quite as bad because Orlando was up by more and Cleveland didn't miss 20 something straight shots, but that would have been absolutely demoralizing if Cleveland had lost that game. And that's why it feels like Detroit feels like they're probably going to win this series just because just the fact that like a lot went right for the Cavs and the Pistons still had a chance to come in there and win the game. That's where it feels like Detroit's doing everything right so far, and that's credit to the players, coaching staff. But like you said, there's some things that both teams can do better. And I think for Detroit, can you find some chemistry with Duren? He was minus 14 in this game, had a few rough offensive fouls. Dennis Jenkins was a minus 28 and he's going to come and go because he actually had some good game. He had good performances through the first couple games of the series. So it's just a matter of does it translate to Cleveland. But Detroit is if as long as they hold home court, they still have the edge, right? Because Cleveland's still going to have to go into Detroit and win a game, and we have yet to see that they're going to be able to. Because like I said, the first 2 games they were right there, but it felt like they were outmatched. Just
Yeah.
Detroit's physicality on both ends of the floor. Because even like Cade, defensively has done some real good stuff, and then just on the offensive end, just attacking like a Harden. There's nothing he can really do. Like there's nothing Mitchell can do. It's really like I said, just Wade and like offensively. I mean, he only took 2 shots, but just like I don't know, Cleveland's got to has a lot to shore up. Like I
Yeah.
just thought they'd be better, but I mean, like you said, the Pistons won 60 games, and this is where coming back against the Magic gives you some real bounce and value
Oh yeah.
because of the fact that now you've gotten that playoff series win, you got a taste of what winning in the playoff series is like, and for the Cavs, there's a lot of pressure because for Cleveland, if they lose this series, that's another year where they don't make it past the second round. They made a huge move to, you know, change their team. And then if you lose again, then anything's on the table, right? Like you could move on from Mitchell, you could move on from Mobley or Allen, you could move on from Atkinson. I mean, like literally anything is on the
Yeah.
table. So every loss that they get, every loss that puts them closer to elimination is gonna wear a lot on a lot of these guys. So, like at least Harden had a bounce back game, but like those first 2 games were pretty rough where like he looked like he was just old and slow and like I said, not being able to beat guys off the
Yeah.
dribble. And that's kind of been a theme of some of these players in some of these series. But yeah, like it's just funny because like who did you feel like Cleveland played well in this game?
At times, yeah. I mean,
Okay,
like they're like like you said, there were runs and times where they
right.
looked very potent, right? Where
Yeah,
Donovan Mitchell looked like the best player on the floor. Harden looked comfortable. Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, they look solid as
yeah,
well. But I still think offensively they should be way better than this. And
yeah,
maybe it's a testament to how good defensively Detroit is and how they're able to
right.
bother guys up and down the floor, especially on the defensive end. So it's like I don't really know how I feel about Cleveland, and that's why there's too many question marks about them because I've seen them
Right.
play. I like them on paper, but I don't like the way they play, which is why
Yeah.
I couldn't bring myself to pick them no matter
Yeah.
what.
Tough.
And it could be a 10-game series. I'm not picking Cleveland.
Right. Yeah. It's the guards. It's relying on tough shots. They don't play that fast or move the ball a ton. I mean, they had 22 assists, but Detroit had 23 assists. Like I don't know if people feel like Detroit is like a fast-paced offense where like, there's a ton of ball movement and everything.
No,
You know what I mean?
God, no.
Yeah, yeah, like that's my point. So, and I know Cade had 10 of them. So he had like half their assists, but like still, like the Cavs offense just it doesn't look the same as it did even last year, right? Like last year, it was like that was all of the
Perfect.
talk about the Cavs is the ball movement and how fast and how quick everything was. But if you're taking Wade out, who are you putting in there though?
I don't know. They should have never got rid of Hunter, to be honest. But you know, maybe he wasn't the answer at all either. But
Yeah,
um,
then you wouldn't have Schroeder.
yeah, because I can't put Tyson in there. I don't trust him enough.
Right.
Struce is not that archetype that I would kind of want being the
Right.
three on a team like
Like
that.
especially next to Mitchell and Harden,
That's what
like
I just
because like
said. A team
he
like
does
that,
compete. He does compete, but it just I don't know. Like it's just tough. It's just tough.
they don't have the personnel for this. I'm telling you, they really don't. It's a bad
Offensively,
matchup.
yeah. Offensively, he's probably the best fit in terms of like just being able to make quick decisions. But it's just it would be but like, Tyson, it would be nice if you got the same regular season production. But
Yeah, it's just not
it's the
there.
playoffs.
Yeah.
And it's just not there. But for the Pistons, they're still in a good spot. Like, because like they had a chance to steal this game and they didn't. Game 4 is like that's the one where I'm very curious to see how that goes. Because if Cleveland can win that game and get it 2-2, like then it's a coin flip. But like I said, still winning 4 out of 5 is really difficult. That's
Oh
why
yeah.
not winning those first 2 games is kind of tough.
Yeah.
Um, then OKC LA game 3. This one was a beatdown. It's kind of interesting how like in the series, the way that the games have gone, we're like through the first, I don't know, like 2.5 quarters, it's pretty competitive. Where it's like you feel like it wouldn't be because I know I picked OKC in a sweep, and I honestly thought that like the way that the regular season matchups went, it would be kind of more the same, especially without Luka. I know OKC doesn't have J Dub, but the first 2.5 quarters are honestly pretty competitive. Where like I give credit to like the players in LA on the Lakers for competing, and then once you get to like the end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, then it's like yeah, this is why OKC is like considered the favorite to go back to back because of all the depth that they have. Even like a guy like Shea hasn't had like an incredible series, and then it doesn't matter, right? Because then you have like AJ Mitchell who gives you 24 and 10. You have Chet, who's honestly been great this series. He's probably been their best player in this series,
Yeah.
right? Like, for Oklahoma, like he's been better than Shea. Hartenstein's giving them good production, even off the bench, like a Kason Wallace, Isaiah Joe, Caruso, McCain. Didn't do much in this game, but like in the other 2 games in OKC, he would come in for like a couple of spurts, like just as a spark plug, which was kind of the role that we envisioned him to be. A guy like an Aaron Wiggins who played a ton last year, like doesn't play unless it's garbage time, which is kind of a testament, like I said, to all the depth that they acquired. Then on the other end, when you look at LA, right, then it's like Rui has to play 40 minutes, LeBron has to play 40 minutes, Reeves has to play 40 minutes. And then after that, like look off the bench. I think it's Kennard who played 29 in this game. Hayes played 8.5, pretty much kind of jettisoned from there. Adu Thiero, eight boards, but he's a rookie. He didn't play much in the regular season because he was hurt. They had to bring in Kleba, right, who was probably worse than Jackson Hayes.
Yep.
Right? So yeah, and like that's kind of like where you see the gap in terms of like, even like obviously like yeah, if you had Luca, if you had J Dub, maybe it looks different. But I think OKC would still win the series just because again, like the lack of depth for the Lakers on both ends of the floor is like, that's kind of the difference there. Like even in the front court, right? Like yeah, you've contained Shea, but then the bigs go off like in all these games, right? Like every game, Chet's basically somewhere around 20 and 10. Hardenstein, not 20 and 10, but consistently putting up big numbers. And then like on the other end, it's like Ayton was good against Houston, but in this series, it's been pretty rough. And then after that, I don't think any of the other bigs for LA have been good at all. So I mean, that's kind of really the gap there. It's like OKC is the better team, and this is kind of why most people expected it to be a 4 or 5 game series, especially assuming that Luka wasn't coming back. Even LeBron like wasn't great in this game, but honestly, he was better in this series than I kind of expected. I kind of expected him to just kind of look, like I kind of expected him to kind of just have like a series where it's a lot of turnovers, a lot of missed shots, and he's posting up and scoring on bigger guys. Rui turning into Clay. this postseason pretty cool, but it's just not enough. And then, obviously with Reeves, it's been kind of up and down in the series, really good in game 2, awful in game 1, okay in game 3, but it's just not enough, right? And this is kind of why this was assumed to be the quickest series, right? Like there's another one that's 3-0 that's maybe for some people is a little bit more surprising, but this one isn't really too surprising, just in the sense of like, this is the best team in the league going against a team that's not 100%. And even at full strength, probably wouldn't be able to beat OKC, but it would have been nice to see it just to see how it matches up.
Yeah. I think this series, I think you and I both were on the same page, right?
Right.
Especially,
Yeah.
on the stream, right, where we both picked the Lakers or the Thunder, excuse me, to to
Wicked
win
slip.
this, to win this very very easily and very handedly, take care of business, right? And that's what's happened. And I think we kind of both were under the impression that Shea would pop off, but I'll give the Lakers credit. They have done a very good job, I think, of containing him and, making him feel uncomfortable, but there's just too much firepower everywhere else. And
Right.
Chet has just been having a great, great series. And I think that's something that we had talked about on the stream as well. I was pretty confident that Chet was going to have a field day with Ayton, especially if they were going to run the double big lineup, which I
Mhm.
expected them to do that.
Right.
And lo and behold, in the 32 minutes that he's played every single game, he's been amazing on both ends of the floor. He's,
Mhm.
done everything that you would want him to do, especially defensively, and then offensively is just icing on the cake. Then you got Jared McCain, you got all these just wonderful, wonderful pieces, around the team that are just,
Mhm.
coming together and taking care of business. And I think LA is frustrated, as they should be. There's a lot of complaining, as maybe there should be, but regardless, this is just you're just outclassed, right? This is a contender versus a pretender at this point. Granted, neither team is fully healthy, but even if this was a fully healthy matchup, I really don't think LA stands a chance. Like, sure, Luka gives them, a better shot at making this, a competitive series, but I just think Oklahoma City has too much potency on both ends of the floor where you can't really escape it. You really can't because, like you said, competitive game through 3 quarters, very competitive, and then boom, once they're on and they just open up that floodgate, turn their defense into offense. Now the shots start falling from I don't know Caruso or Lou Dort, right? Then you start to kind of feel like, all right, this is going to be over pretty quickly, and now you're down 30. So it's just it's a tough fight because they have so much depth, they have so much talent, and they can really hurt you in so many different ways if you really
Right.
just, you know, give them that opening. And I think that's the problem. LA has too many openings, way too many openings, right? You're relying on guys too much. AR doesn't look too great, obviously, coming off of an injury. Can't really rely on Braun for 40 minutes like this in a series like this, where this is an experienced team. This is a former champion. They're they're going back to back potentially. So, it's a tough fight for them, and I think everybody and their mother expected this outcome, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anybody really expected this to go past 5.
Yeah, even if you were like a Laker fan, like I don't really remember anybody picking, maybe like 5, I think might have been the most I've seen.
Yep.
But outside of that, cuz it's just a tough matchup. Like cuz in the regular like I said it wasn't as bad as it was in the regular season. And we only got I think one matchup where both teams were pretty reasonably healthy. That was the one ironically where both Reeves and Luca got hurt. But outside of that, like there wasn't really a ton of evidence that it would be more competitive other than like it's the playoffs. Maybe some of the guys for OKC don't play as well as they did in the regular season. But like even and it's funny, like a guy like an AJ Mitchell is kind of a player that we talked about that they could have really used last year, right? Like it didn't matter last year, but like just another guy other than Shea that can actually handle the ball and create offense. And like, yeah, J Dub also fills that role too. But like if J Dub comes back and he's healthy, then that's your 6 man guy off the bench, right? Who can be, because his role I don't think really changes a whole lot.
No.
Like if he comes off the
And
bench,
he's a
he's
guard. It's beautiful.
right. Yeah, exactly. So like that's kind of the archetype of player that's like they were missing. Even a guy like a McCain, right? Like you could just plug him in for like 10 minutes, or 5 minutes a half or something like that, 10, 15 minutes, and just let him, get off a few shots. And he can do it in this series, just because, you don't have a lot of guys that you are worried about like him taking advantage of or
Mhm.
getting taken advantage of.
Mhm.
There's just a couple guys like LeBron, Reeves, maybe like if Rui is in the post or something like that. But you can play him in a series like this. So the main thing for me for OKC now is just J-Dub. Like, what does he look like? Because he got hurt against Phoenix, I think, in game 2. So he hasn't played since then. If he comes back and he's reasonably healthy, like, they're still going to be the favorites just because of what they already have plus what they've added since then. Where it could get tricky if he's not healthy, right? Like, so like say it's the conference finals between whoever comes out between Wolves Spurs and he's either not available at all or just not 100%, that might get a little bit trickier just because I think, like they may stand a better chance. But, as of right now, like this is why OKC is viewed as the best team in the league, right? And so they're the reigning champ, so it's theirs to lose, I would say.
I agree with you on that one.
Right? Yeah. So then moving on, we have a couple other series. Um, Knicks Sixers and
We're calling that a series?
Spurs Wolves. So we'll talk about Knicks Sixers
yeah.
first. I guess. Unless you want to talk about Spurs.
No, let's get the Knicks out of here.
Okay. So Knicks go up 3-0. I had Knicks in 7. It will not go 7. I guess Embiid missed the game, but it hasn't really mattered. And the thing with the Knicks, because we start with the team that is up in the series, is really the key for them is the defense combined with the offense. Because like the thing was against Atlanta, right? They had an issue, in games 2 and 3 where just down the stretch their offense just was ugly. It was bogged down. They couldn't really score. It kind of turned into like just one-on-one. Not moving the ball around. That's not really been the case. Like since that point, there's been a lot more, but just spread out diversity with their offense, right? Where it's like Towns gets to have the ball at the top, looking for cutters, right? That's really cool. You can still mix in the Brunson offense. Bridges has gotten it going right after some horrible games against the Hawks, right? Since then, he's been good. Obviously, OG before he got hurt was a monster, right? I know we had some discussions about how well he was playing, but he was really good. I mean, you could argue. I mean, he hasn't been, but like you could argue he's been their best player before he got hurt. I mean, like like Brunson is the best player, but you know what I mean in terms of what OG is doing on both ends of the floor, the added depth as well. So like since that low point against Atlanta, everything's clicked on both ends of the floor. And against this Philly team, like Bridges has done a really good job containing Maxey, because that was kind of the question. Because like in the regular season, he torched New York, right? Like I mean, that was a matchup where like the regular season argument was kind of why you could make the case that like maybe Philly could win just because those games were competitive. I think it was a split season series, but it's the difference between the regular season and the playoffs, because as we've seen in the playoffs, like there's been some series where if you just went by the regular season, you would have had a different result. Like even like Cleveland Detroit. I think Cleveland won that regular season series. I think Knicks Sixers was split, right? But just in general, like either way, like in terms of what the Knicks have done on both ends of the floor, like they've looked like not even just like a Eastern Conference team, like they look like a championship level team just based off the way that they've played on both ends of the floor with the depth and like just also like just the comfort, right? Where like they, for the most part, like they'll have a couple of stretches where it looks kind of weird. Like, in game 3, the Sixers made a comeback. Game 2, right? Philly was up for most of the game, but it just never felt like that the Knicks were going to completely lose either of those games. And like when you're in that mode, just watching what they've done, like I said, on both ends of the floor, because I know like that's kind of the difference is like the Knicks last year had stretches early in the season where their defense wasn't great. Then it got better as the season went on. The Pacers one was rough, but I think that was a bad matchup. But in all these games so far, they've been great, right? And then obviously, like, the stamp was like when they had the beatdown of the Hawks, where I don't even think we had a chance to talk about that, where they were up like 50 at halftime or whatever ridiculous number it was.
Yeah.
So they've been great. And then from the Sixers, just not enough, right? Like obviously Embiid, hasn't been that great in the series, probably not healthy either, which has kind of just been the story with him. Maxey hasn't been that amazing. I don't think it's completely his fault. Part of it is the Knicks defense. He's probably just ran out of gas too. He's been playing a ton. He's had to play a ton. Philly has no depth. Paul George was great against Boston, not been great against the Knicks, and that's kind of another guy like Harden where it's like if you can't beat your guys off the dribble, you're going to be in a spot where you're going to be really reliant on your jump shooting, and it's really hard to do that for 48 minutes in a 7-game series unless you're like a Steph Curry or somebody like that. And that's not what Paul George is, as good as he had been. And then after that, you just got nothing from anyone else, right? Like, I mean, in game 2, I think it was, right? That was the game where they just got rid of both the bigs in the fourth quarter, and like no Drummond, no Bona. We're gonna use Paul George on Karl Anthony Towns, and that's kind of the crazy thing is like Towns has not had like an amazing series, and it hasn't mattered. Like so, the Knicks are up 3-0, and hopefully OG can come back because I think they need him to come back if they want to be able to actually win the whole thing or have a chance to win the whole thing, maybe even win the next series. But they've been really awesome. I mean, like you could argue they've been like as good as OKC. I mean, obviously OKC hasn't lost a game, but just like in terms of like these were expected to be more competitive series than the series that OKC was involved in, right? So the fact that like they've by and large handled their business. I know the first round went 6, but like now they're up 3-0, could easily just end it. By the time everybody sees this episode, they've looked great. Like I said, they look like a championship team. It's not even just like an Eastern Conference contender. Like they look like they could, if things go their way, like they look like a championship level team.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. After I saw Game One, I realized this team had entered flow state.
Right.
Because everything that they're doing is beautiful, right? Every
Hmm.
single guy is doing something out there. Josh Hart may not be a scorer, but he's on the floor, he's hustling, he's getting rebounds, the normal stuff. I'm just gonna go, up the tiers of these guys, right? And
Right.
based on the way they've been playing. I think Towns has been solid, right? He hits shots. Offensively, he's been okay. Game 3, not so much. Didn't really need him though. But especially like I said in that Game 1, I'm just like, okay, wow, this is interesting, right? Spacing the floor, great. Bridges, difficult shot making, tough shot making, defense, it's all there. OG, absolute perfection, along with
Yeah.
Jalen Brunson. I think Jalen Brunson and OG have played, amazing. Obviously, we're talking about Game 3, so no OG, but um, you know, shout out to Brunson because I think it's time that people put a little bit more respect on his name, especially as one of the top offensive engines. Been praising him from the start because I
Hmm.
remember the beginning of the season, a lot of people were kind of like, I don't know how I feel about Brunson or whatever, just because
Right.
he gets picked on a little bit, picked on defensively, but I think when he's doing his best offensively, this is what the Knicks really look like, and everybody else is feeding off of that energy. Right now, you have Mikal Bridges, being a tough shot maker, which is what he
Yes, he's
used to
been
be.
good.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Like last year, he was okay. He had a great series against Boston, but there were other times when you're like, I don't know how I feel
Yeah.
about this team in general, right? And so it's not just
Right.
him. But this year, it feels like they've really figured it out coming off of that Atlanta series. And sometimes it's what it takes, right? It takes a really good team to be backed up against a wall
Hmm.
and have to figure things out and make adjustments and get a different look because Philly is a completely different look. And they're more geared and more, I think, well equipped to take on a team like that where you have, a bunch of wings that can really lock down 1 through 4, right? While also being weapons on the offensive end. So shout out to Mike Brown, shout out to the Knicks, shout out to Jalen Brunson, and I hope OG gets healthy because they're going to need him if they do, move on.
Yeah. In a postseason where Bridges had what like a couple of games where he either didn't score or was like under single digits, he's shooting 60% from the field and 40% from three. In the 9 games that the Knicks have played, only averaging 13 points a game, but like I said, he's been great on both ends of the floor. So that's the key for the Knicks. As long as the defense stays where it is, they will be they will have a chance to win every game that they play. And like you said, like when you watch them play, everything that they do, like they'll have a couple of weird lulls and whatnot, like and that happens over the course of a game. But like for the most part, like they look like they're in control of everything that they want to do. Like, like in game one. Like you thought that maybe in game one, maybe Philly just gets wiped out just because like they took out Boston for for everybody who's not like a Boston person. Like, they took out Boston in 7 games, so they're probably gassed,
Yeah.
right? But but like even in games 2 and 3, where like game 2, Philly was up for most of the game. Game 3, Philly uh beat the tar out of New York, right? In the first quarter, like they had a lead for a decent stretch, and then the Knicks eventually worked their way back in, and then never looked back, and then the game wasn't really close by the time you got to the fourth quarter. So, like I said, they've been very impressive so far this postseason. Like I said, hopefully OG can come back and stay healthy because that's the concern with the hamstring is then you got to play every other night. against, tougher competition, right? Because whoever they play next, right, is probably going to be, a tough matchup potentially for them. So, and that's the thing, like with the Knicks, where this was my pick, and I think it was your pick as well to make the NBA Finals in the Eastern Conference, and this is why, like in terms of the talent on both ends of the floor, the wings, the guard play, the bigs, like you have everything. You
Yeah.
pretty much have everything you need to make a run, and now you don't have to worry about Indiana, you don't have to worry about Boston. We'll see if you have to worry about Detroit or Cleveland because they're playing one of those two teams. If they don't have OG, that might be a problem. Now you got to worry if you come out of the East and play whoever you play in the West. But
Oh yeah.
if OG's healthy, like they have a chance. Like they're probably not gonna be favored, but they're gonna have a chance.
No.
And I think the Spurs, they definitely would have a good shot because
Oh yeah. They might be
shown,
favored against that
yeah,
team, honestly.
because
Among
they've shown,
fans.
and like it's the regular season, but like they've shown like that they have a roadmap for beating San Antonio. The OKC one might be a tougher one, but and obviously we don't have to go that far ahead. But like I said, they look the part of, okay, this is a finals team. This is like a championship contender, at least to me. And I think you feel that clearly. You feel that way too.
Oh yeah.
So this is what we were hoping to see. Like this is what we were hoping to see a year ago, because I think. Yeah, because I think last year you picked the Knicks, I think, as the championship team, right?
Yes, I did, and it was because
yeah,
of this.
exactly.
I thought I saw it on
Right.
paper, but execution wasn't all the way there.
Right. So like you were on the Knicks boat early. Exactly.
Very.
So like that, yeah. So now there's no real reason for them not to do it this year.
No.
So I'm curious to see how that goes. And then after that, Spurs Wolves, pretty cool series so far. I mean, game one was a barn burner where the Wolves, I think against all odds, honestly, were able to take game one in the fourth quarter. And then game two, you kind of expected that, right? Where it was like, okay, the Spurs lost game one. So you're probably, and historically, we see that a lot where home team loses game one. It's a beatdown in game two. And it was a beatdown. I think they were up over I think they ended up winning by 37 or something like that. But, they were up by even more than that over the course of the game. And then game three was the one to watch because in this game, obviously now you're in Minnesota. Obviously, the Wolves, huge difference between game one and game two. But you kind of felt like, all right, Minnesota mainly did what they needed to do. They needed to get a split. What does it look like when they go back to Minnesota? And the Spurs early in the first quarter threw the first punch, where Minnesota, I don't even think scored more than 4 points through the first 7-8 minutes of the game. And then all of a sudden, a huge run at the end of the first quarter, led by Anthony Edwards, allows them to take the lead after being down. And that was kind of where, okay, this is starting to get kind of concerning for San Antonio, where you threw the first punch, they couldn't score. You would think on paper they're demoralized, but nope. Like they've done all postseason, they were able to bounce back. Then you had the second half duel where it was basically, Anthony Edwards and Wemby, over the course of this game, they were the two stars in this game, and Wemby ended up coming out on top with just a ridiculous game three performance, right? He had 16 points in the fourth quarter. I believe finished with 39 points, like 17 rebounds. Didn't get 11 blocks this time, but that's okay.
Got 5.
Yeah, exactly. Still had 5. And since game two, I've actually liked a lot more what they've done with him offensively, where they're getting him on the move a lot more, kind of putting him around the basket early on, right? Where it's like these quick rolls, maybe some of the guards screen for him, and he gets these easy lobs, easy shots around the rim. Then he starts to work his way out as the game goes on. It's not just early on, just like the kill shot threes, where like in game one, he took like 8 of them, right? And they all missed. He had not made a lot of threes early on in this series. And then obviously still a terror around the basket on defense. And then like in the second half, right, like these tough drives to the basket where he's putting the ball on the floor, finishing through contact, finishing over players, shooting over players. This is kind of why everybody was like just punching their fists when the Spurs took him number one, right? When the Spurs got the number one pick, shout out to number one. Because like this is kind of like, wow, this could be, this might be the worst that we'll see of him right now. And he's doing this in year 3 with a team that on paper you would think shouldn't be here, right? But they are here. It's just a matter of, are they going to win this series? I think before I knew that Anthony Edwards was healthy, like I picked the Spurs in 5 because I'm like, even if Anthony, because I didn't even expect him to come back until like around game 3 or 4, and by that point I'm like, it's too late. But then he comes back, and it's like maybe the Wolves have a chance, and they still have a chance. But the problem is that when you watch the Spurs in the fourth quarter, and the other issue is like the guards for the Spurs, where it's like every game, it's like at least a couple of those guys that have stretches where they just basically take the game over, right? Like in game one, even though they lost, right? Like you had some big performances from like Castle, but then like Fox in game one had a really rough game. Then in games 2 and 3, he was a lot better. Castle didn't shoot as well. But then like Harper would have stretches like in game 2. It's like the huge run that the Spurs go on where like the game goes from a close game, because game 2 was close in the first quarter, and then from the second quarter on, beat down, right? And then Julian Champagnie, right, was like almost a hero in game 1, even though he missed the game winner. Game 3 only had 6 points, but had 12 rebounds, where he's now kind of continued this theme of crashing the offensive glass, and it's actually been probably caught the Wolves by surprise, because he's not really looked at as like a rebounder of any sorts, right? Because the Spurs outside of Wemby, you're looking at them, and it's like it's kind of a small team, right? That's kind of the argument. If you made the case for the Wolves to win, that's kind of the argument you make, where it's like Julius Randle being able to score on some of the Spurs smaller guys, or like a Naz Reid, or even Gobert, right? Some of these mismatches. And it's and Carter Bryant, shout out to him too, because this was a guy where he didn't play in game 1, and since then, like, you can see that they actually missed him just in terms of the value he brings on both ends of the floor. He's actually making a couple threes. So it's been pretty cool to watch the Spurs. Like even like a Vassell, like it's not like he shot amazing. He shot 6 for 14, 43%, 1 of 6 from 3, but just the fact that all the guys that are coming out here are contributing, and then obviously you have the superstar production from Wemby, been pretty awesome to watch. And then on the other end for Minnesota, just a rough one, because this was a game where like this was a winnable game, despite how awful the first quarter went. And Anthony Edwards was actually really good in this game. He had 32 points, 14 boards, 6 assists. It seems like now the Spurs are trying to blitz and trap him, and kind of trying to force him to make the extra read and the extra pass, right? And he's actually doing it. He only had 2 turnovers, but the problem is that you're just not getting enough from some of these other guys, right? Like, the bench for Minnesota was okay, right? Like Reed had 18 and 9. Dosunmu actually had 11 and 7, right? And most of that was in the second half. Shannon Jr. had a couple buckets, but then like if you look outside of Gobert, like Conley didn't really give them anything. He didn't start in the second half, didn't play much after that. And then Randall was 3 for 12, and Jaden McDaniels was 5 for 22. Like that's the game right there, pretty much, right? And that's the Spurs defense, where they're not easy shots. Like, yeah, Randall, and the funny thing with Randall was he had a number of shots where they're jumpers. And like most of his strength is attacking the basket, getting close to the basket. It's not always like just layups and dunks, but just being able to get close enough to the basket where he can bully guys, and he wasn't really able to do that comfortably. And McDaniels was 3 for 8 from 3, but everywhere else in between, like the mid-range area where he's been great against Denver, that did not work in this game. He had 17 points, but like I said, that was really the difference to me, because like really the stars were the main guys that showed up. You just needed a little bit more from the supporting casts, and like the Spurs got it with Fox and Castle and Vassell, and then Champagnie had a couple shots, and for the Wolves you didn't have that. So the Spurs, I feel like, have made the right adjustments to where if as long as it continues out, they should be able to wrap up this series. But game 4 to me is the must see swing game, because obviously if the Spurs win it, they go up 3-1, pretty much end the series, and make it, I think, really tough for Minnesota to come back. Also should have mentioned Anthony Edwards started in this game as opposed to coming off the bench, and he played 40 minutes. So now, like after game 1, it's kind of funny, because like I said, I picked the Spurs in 5 not knowing that Anthony Edwards would come back, and it was like, okay, Wolves steal game 1. Looks like they have a good chance, where it's like, okay, it feels like maybe Minnesota will win the series. But as this is kind of panning out, now it's like, okay, it's not completely over, but now you might have to lean San Antonio, because, especially considering what you're not able to get consistently from Minnesota. Even at the end, where it was like, you probably should have closed with Reed over Randall, but it's kind of hard to just say, like, let's bench Julius Randle, because he was so key for them in game 1 with his playmaking and his shot making down the stretch over smaller players. So it's a tall task for Minnesota, where it's like, this is not the Nuggets, because like just in terms of the Spurs, the defense that they can put out there, even without the size, it's a lot better than anything Denver could really muster up, especially without like Aaron Gordon or Peyton Watson.
Yeah. Dare I say, San Antonio might be the most adaptable team in the playoffs at the moment. I think
Okay.
they 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 tend to, I think, get hit a lot early on, and then once they realize the error in their ways, they come out and make adjustments, and they're not afraid of that. And I think that's the beauty of this team, right? Game one was a little odd, I think, in terms of what they attempted to do. I think from a multitude of factors, right? Like Wemby wasn't really there. Um, other guys didn't necessarily show up in the ways that I think they could have in game one. I think this series could be 3-0, if I'm being completely honest, if they played basketball the right way in game one. But, they adapted. They did things a lot better, and especially in game three, what a duel we got between, Anthony Edwards and Wemby. But, this team puts on so much rim pressure. They know what they're doing in terms of shot creation. They know how to get the ball to certain guys. And everybody knows their role, and they're not afraid of those roles either. Like, if they need rebounding, they're going to go, say, Champagne, you need to do this because that's what we pay you to do, right? In terms of, being a Swiss Army knife. If they need a quick bucket, all right, we go to Fox. If they need, some rim pressure, Castle, and then Wemby's already down there as well. And then, you have Harper doing the same thing off the bench. So, this team, they kind of have an answer for everything. It may take them a little while, but better late than never, if you want me to be honest. And, same thing happened in the Portland series too, right? Where it's like, at times you look at them and you're like,
Yeah.
is this what we were expecting, right? Because everybody's like, exactly.
17.
It's like playoff debut. I mean, it's like, all right, well, I don't know how I feel about this. Then boom, now Portland looks like absolute nothing. Like they look like they shouldn't have even belonged in that series, and that's kind of how I'm feeling about Minnesota at the moment. So yeah, I think I picked San Antonio in 6 on the stream. Can't remember, but that was kind of the thought process. I just feel like if you have Wemby, there's really no excuse to lose to this team. And I know people are trying to give Gobert his flowers or whatever, but it's like at some point Wemby was going to pop off and have a game like this where he's just going to hurt you inside and out. And then obviously, yeah, it's hyper efficient. It's almost like freaking 2K numbers, if you want me to be honest. And then, you have the other guys just creating all this rim pressure. Vassell being, a knockdown shooter. In this game, not so much, but it's still a matter of the spacing of things, right? Like he's a guy that you cannot leave wide open at all. And then, along with Champagne as well. So, when they're firing on all cylinders like that, it's kind of rough to contend with when, they're just kind of throwing everything at you in the paint. And then defensively, haven't even really talked about, well, you did, but defensively, they can give you so many looks. They can double you, they can triple you if they want, while also kind of feeling like, nobody's open. So it's kind of crazy in terms of what they're able to do, and then making guys uncomfortable. It's just
Wemby had 5 fouls, and it felt like even with the 5 fouls, he still was a real problem to score on. I mean, because the funny thing for Minnesota was they shot 14 of 40 from 3. So they shot slightly worse than the Spurs, but like they made more threes, but then they still shot 38% from the field, right? Because everything inside the 3-point line was as difficult as possible, right? Like in the second half, they shot 42% from the field, even though they shot 40% from 3, right? Now, but in the first half, they shot 35% from the field and 30% from 3, right? So that first half was indicative of it was a real struggle for Minnesota, even though they came back and like they were able to, kind of withstand that initial punch thrown by the Spurs. But yeah, it feels like the Spurs have kind of taken control back. This has been kind of a back and forth series. So like I said, before I knew Anthony Edwards was healthy, I had the Spurs in 5, but that was, like I said, more so just based off of, I didn't think if Anthony Edwards was going to come back later in the series, they just weren't going to have a chance because he's kind of part of the key to this series. And I thought, and like I said, the X factor, I think I said on the stream after game 1, like, Fox and Randall to me are like kind of the big X factors for both teams, where it's like if Fox has good games for the Spurs, then that's going to tilt things towards San Antonio versus like Randall having good games is going to tilt things towards Minnesota. And like I said, Randall was not very good in this game, and Fox, he was a -2, But it felt like, during the stretch where they really needed him to show up, he actually played pretty well because he had, I think, 11 points, 4 assists in the second half. Because in the first half, he was pretty quiet until like right at halftime, right where he made a couple buckets. And with Harper and Castle still being pretty young guys, like he's kind of a key, right? That's kind of why he's like a very polarizing player for the Spurs, right? Where it's like he's being paid a lot of money, but he's also been a guy that's been in the playoffs before, and like if he's not going to be good, then that's going to make things really difficult for San Antonio. So keeps up, if he plays well, that usually to me bodes well for the Spurs. But obviously the highlight is Wemby, just like I said, in terms of how incredible he was in this game. So
Yeah.
yeah, so now in terms of the series, right? Like I said, we got two that are 2-1, and we got two that are 3-0. So we've gotten some, and like the individual games, like most of them were pretty good. But I guess kind of like what's been the difference to you, like with the second round versus the first round? Because obviously, like in the first round, and you kind of hinted at it with Portland, where it's like you had a couple of teams where it just looked like that they just were overmatched, and that's kind of what's going to happen usually with a 1-8-2-7 matchup, unless it's Orlando Detroit. But like, what's kind of been the main difference to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's interesting because I think the first round matchups um were a mixed bag, right? And I think there were a lot of surprises there. But at the end of the day, a lot of these teams, kind of came out and obviously are now playing each other. So I think that's the cool part is a lot of these teams faced a little bit of adversity. And
Mm.
and now they're playing teams that are a completely different look, and I think that's made these series a little entertaining, right? And I think the Spurs Timberwolves series is definitely by far the most entertaining, right? And like the whole Minnesota storyline, like shout out to them for even getting here. I
Yeah,
didn't think they could get here, but shout out to them for taking out Denver, shorthanded at times. So
right.
like I said, it's just interesting to see these teams climb out of adversity and then have to face a completely different team. Like now you're facing the Spurs, where that is, obviously you have a centerpiece on the offense with Wemby,
Mhm.
um, but and then Wemby's kind of not like Jokic at all, but he's still a star center. But it's a
Right.
completely different look, completely different team, completely different identity. So overall, I've enjoyed the playoffs for sure. Like even even like the Lakers Rockets series, I know that was kind of a bummer for Rockets fans and people who picked the Rockets, but it was still cool to see the Lakers get a playoff victory. Albeit now you have to face Oklahoma City and they're not doing too hot. But like I said, the first round was cool, but I think the second round is where things start to heat up, and then now we get a slight preview of what the conference finals can potentially be, and then from there
Yeah.
we already know it's just business.
Yeah. The big physical teams, it kind of feels like in a lot of these have like an advantage. And like I said, the Spurs, like you probably wouldn't even really consider them a big team, but then it's like they have Wemby. So
Yeah.
then like it doesn't even really matter. And like, Castle's a big physical guard. So, there's that factor too, as is Harper. But it's kind of funny. I don't know if this necessarily means a whole lot, but like one of the things that I kind of looked at is like 3-point attempts because I remember the Celtics, right? The year they won the title, coming off that, it kind of felt like everybody was talking about how like the league might be starting to veer towards like these 3-point heavy teams, right? Because remember the conversation of like every team plays the same, they just jack up a bunch of threes. But then like if you look at 3-point attempts, Boston number one in the playoffs, 46 threes a game, which is an absurd number. Out in round one. The second team, the Blazers, at 30 a game, also out in round one, but they're not a good 3-point shooting team anyways. It's kind of like they're giving a lot of the shots. Cleveland at 37 and a half, fighting for their lives in round two, and they went to 7. So like it was not like that was an easy victory for them. And I think their 3-point shooting just hasn't been as good as it was in the regular season. And that's kind of part of the problem for Cleveland because they're largely a jump shooting team. You got the Suns at 37 and a half. They went out in round one. After that, you have to get to number 5 with Oklahoma City, right? Who's shooting 39% from three, 37 attempts a game. Then after that, it's Atlanta, it's Orlando. In terms of attempts, it's Houston, and then the Spurs are down at 9. So, like, maybe that kind of lets us know, like, the Knicks are down at like 13th in terms of playoff teams, so they're towards the bottom in terms of 3-point attempts. Now, OKC's top 5, Spurs are like right in the middle, they're ninth. But that does kind of show us, like, yeah, if you watch a lot of these teams, they don't really play the same. Like Detroit and Cleveland don't play the same at all. Those are two completely different teams, right? Like, I mean, LA, OKC, like they don't really play the same. Like, obviously, LA is going to look different anyways without Luca, but like, Spurs, Minnesota, like they don't really play the same. Like, so, like you're getting a lot of different teams in terms of the identities they have, and that's kind of starting to show itself as we move into the playoffs more, where it's like, okay, now maybe some of these teams like Boston, like whenever they go into the offseason, they're probably going to have to make some changes to the roster where they're going to have to apply a little bit more rim pressure, right? Get some guys that can get to the basket and finish at the rim a little bit more consistently than, just being a super 3-point shooting team. You still need guys that can hit threes. It's not that the 3-point shot isn't important. Because even like with OKC, like we've talked about their defense, but like their offense is pretty key too. Like when they don't knock down jumpers, they are a lot more vulnerable
Yeah.
than when they normally are. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm looking at
Mm-hmm.
for the second round right now. It's just like the difference in terms of like what we thought the league might be trending towards. Even like when we think about it, like there was the like now you have all these big teams, right? Where like all these teams have multiple bigs, they can play multiple guys together. Like Minnesota sometimes will play three. Obviously the Knicks have their double bigs, right? OKC's got their double bigs. So Cleveland, I guess, has their double bigs. I guess Detroit doesn't really run double bigs. They don't really do that, but
No.
part of that's because they don't really have any shooting bigs. So you
Bingo.
can't really, yeah, it doesn't really work like that. So, but it is pretty cool to just see some variety with a lot of these teams.
For sure.
Yeah. So now, moving on, we have a couple of other things I guess to discuss before we kind of wrap it up. So Steve Kerr looks like he's going to be back with the Warriors. He signed a 2-year extension to stay with the team, and this was one where like it didn't seem like people were completely sure what was going to happen, right? Because you had like a group that kind of felt like he might move on. I think Draymond in one of his podcasts said he may not come back, and then like on one of the inside the NBA shows, he was kind of saying like that he might. So I don't know there, but um, it is interesting, right? Because obviously it's not like he's the oldest coach in the league, but we know and understand that obviously the Warriors are in a different spot now than they were a few years ago, right? Where now they're kind of trending towards being a team that's probably not going to be able to have a realistic shot at winning the title. They could still be a good team, playoff team that could win a playoff series, but they may not necessarily be able to be a championship contender. Now, maybe they just completely reconfigure the roster because there is reporting suggesting that, like, yeah, they're going to build around Steph, and it's like, well, that's kind of what you would have assumed they would have done anyways. But
My God.
yeah, but either way, um, like obviously it's kind of wild because you kind of assumed for the longest time that like, yeah, all those guys are going to go out together. Because I think I remember like when they lost to LA in 23, and I was like, yeah, the window's probably closed, and we just kind of assumed at some point like those guys will go out together. Who knows? Maybe they like would luck up and win another one. But now it's like Clay's gone. There was a real chance Draymond could have been gone, like if they had actually traded for like a Giannis or somebody at the deadline. And then it was kind of pointing to maybe Steve Kerr's gone because there was like a stretch where they were reporting like who could be his potential replacement. But now he's going to come back, so now it's I'm kind of curious to see what the Warriors do from here on out because now you have Curry, you still have Steph, you have a roster where like on paper if they're healthy, like they could still be good, but you still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of trends towards the fact that he's probably going to be out whenever Steph is out, and I guess that's okay.
Mhm.
Maybe. I don't really know how I feel about it because I think, I have my gripes with the way that he handles, coaching that team because I feel like there's a lot of squandered talent, but at the same time, I don't think they really have built um too many great rosters as of late,
Mhm.
especially post title or post title for them. So I think there was a little bit of mismanagement. Could have gotten Steph some more help, maybe extended the window. Missed
Mhm.
opportunities for sure. Not all on Steve Kerr, but I think it's gonna probably continue, honestly. So I don't think there's a championship in sight.
Yeah, and like I said, that's going to be the tough part. Is like, are you actually going to be able to win the title? Because like, yes, you have Steph, but you have a roster that is so reliant on like all these guys being healthy, and we just don't have a lot of evidence, that they have it. Like, do they bring back Porzingis? Do they, move the Butler contract or just wait for him to come back? Maybe they get some luck in the lottery, which we'll probably talk about in a minute. But yeah, they have their hands full in terms of what they're gonna do from here on out. So I guess now we might as well close it out with some NBA lottery talk. So by the time that some of you see this episode, so it's going to be funny to see whether how right or wrong we might be. By the time you see this episode, the lottery may have already happened, and we'll actually know who's going to have a good chance at getting, the top picks, right? In terms of who's, got the lottery luck. So right now, the 14 teams in the lottery, you have Washington, who's got the worst record. You have Indiana, Brooklyn, Utah, Sacramento, Memphis. Then you have New Orleans, but it goes to Atlanta, but it goes to Atlanta because New Orleans traded that pick to Atlanta in that Derek Queen deal. Dallas, Chicago, Milwaukee. Milwaukee, I think, will get the worst of the two picks between Atlanta and Milwaukee. Then you have the Warriors. You have OKC, right, who has the Clippers pick. Then you have Miami, and then you have Charlotte at 14. And then the Indiana one is also key because obviously if it falls outside of the top four, it goes to the Clippers with the Zubac trade. So I guess the first thing is do we expect an actual crazy scenario, like in terms of like, okay, we see that list that I just read out in terms of like who's, in order from 1 to 14, but there's always every year in the lottery something stupid, something crazy that happens where like somebody jumps up, somebody moves down, somebody's happy, somebody's disappointed. So you're the Wizards fan, your team had the worst record. So on paper, you're tied for the best odds of getting the number one pick. Because the new rules will take place, I think, next season, right? So
Mhm.
like not this year. But how are you feeling going into this lottery? That's probably the first question I will ask because obviously, like the lottery means a ton to you as a Wizards fan.
Yeah, this is make or break. I'm very scared for the future of my team. We don't have the best luck in terms of the lottery, right? We've been the worst team a couple of times,
Mm-hmm.
more than a couple of times, and not gotten the number one pick. The last time we had the number one pick was John Wall. So do with that information as you wish. But I think they fall. I don't think they get number one. I'd like to get number two, ideally. Um, Three would be nice as well, but I think we're going to fall at a comfortable four and probably end up picking Caleb Wilson. Don't have to go into who gets picked where, but that's kind of my prediction as a Wizards fan. I don't think we're going to get a lot of luck with the lottery, especially considering um, it. In my opinion, I think it is make or break because we just don't have that franchise cornerstone. Anthony Davis at his big age, Trey Young at his big age, I don't think those guys are franchise cornerstones. It's more of a play in first round, maybe second round team, and that's with a lot of things and a lot of the young guys actually panning out next year and, furthermore. So, I think the Wizards need to really strike some luck here in the lottery and end up getting, either Darren Peterson or AJ Devonsa. So we'll see what happens, but I'm not too optimistic on this one.
Yeah, well, I went back, because before we recorded, I mentioned like I went back and did some research in terms of like, okay, since the new lottery odds, like, when's the last time that somebody actually had the worst record with the number one pick? It hasn't happened since the lottery changes, right? The last time it happened was 2018. That was the old lottery. Phoenix had the worst record, and they got the number one pick, and they took DeAndre Ayton. But since that point, right, 2019, Knicks had the worst record. They dropped to 3. They took RJ Barrett. 2020, the Warriors had the worst pick. They dropped to 2. They took Wiseman. 2021, the Rockets had the worst pick. They dropped to 2. They took Jalen Green instead of Cade Cunningham. And then in 2022, OKC had the worst record. They dropped to 2. They took Chet Holmgren. Then in 23 and 24, the Pistons had the worst record, dropped to 5. And then instead of Wemby, they got Asora Thompson, and then they also got, instead of Risa Shea, they got Ron Holland. And then in this past draft in 25, the Jazz had the worst record, right? And then they dropped to 5 and took Ace Bailey. So recent history suggests that you probably shouldn't be super optimistic
Yep.
about keeping the number one pick, right? It seems like you're either dropping to 2 or you're dropping to 5. And then after that, right? Like there's a lot of like actually like big things, in this draft because we already mentioned like say the Pacers, right? Like there's a chance where if they could move up to number 1 or just stay in the top 4, then they get to keep their pick and they also get Zubac, which could be huge for them next year, as long as Halliburton, hopefully comes back and stays healthy. And then obviously, these other teams like Brooklyn, Utah, Sacramento, Memphis, like they would love to have the top pick. I mean, nobody would not want to have the number one pick. It's just like for some of these teams, they need it. Like the Kings don't really have any guys that they build around. Utah, has a core, but they probably wouldn't hate having the number one pick. Um, and then after that, right, Atlanta, like if they get a top pick, that could be huge for them because maybe one of those guys that they take could be like a guy you could build around to play with, that young core of guys that they have. Obviously, the Mavs, everybody. The Bucks can't get the number one pick because they're in that spot where they have the worst pick between them and the Hawks. But I'm sure they would love to jump up to 2 or something like that, so that way, whatever happens with Giannis, they'll be okay. And then you have some of these other teams like the Warriors, OKC, potential doomsday scenarios there. I guess the question is like who needs the number one pick the most? Because obviously you're a Wizards fan, right? So
Mhm.
like you probably feel like your team needs the number one
Yeah,
pick the
I
most.
do.
Do you feel like that there's another team that like actually might need it even more?
Oh, for sure. There's multiple. I think Brooklyn could use it. I think Chicago could use it. Pretty much any team that doesn't have, a potential franchise cornerstone. I think Sacramento could use it. Um, yeah, that's probably about it, maybe.
Yeah. I guess, and then like what would the funniest outcome be?
Um, I mean, OKC getting a top 4 pick, that would be hilarious.
Yeah, that would probably be the most hilarious. Well, I don't know if everybody would think it's funny, but that might be the craziest outcome
Yeah,
if OKC gets out of this, potentially goes back to back, and then gets rewarded with the number one pick,
yeah,
and then the Clippers. Yeah, that would be the funniest. That would probably be the craziest or funniest scenario is OKC jumps to 1, and then Indiana is like 2.
yeah,
So then, like the 2 teams that were in the finals a year ago get the number 1 and the number 2 pick respectively. Where and then the Clippers just have to sit in the chair basically and just watch as their potential chance to get a top pick just completely goes away. So that would probably be the wildest outcome,
yeah.
I would say, probably. Um, and then what would be the one that would probably tick you off the most?
Mm,
Like, what would you like say? Like, obviously, I'm sure, like, if you're the Wizards and you drop to 5, like, that would probably be a very angry outcome. But, like, what would make it even worse? So, like, say Wizards drop from 1 to 5. If they drop from 1 to 5, somebody's jumping in that you wouldn't expect at all. What would be the one where you're just like, would be the worst outcome for you? Like, either for you or for the league.
for
Maybe for you first and then the league.
for me personally, Milwaukee getting number 1. That would piss
Well, they
me.
can't. To be fair, they can't. They can get 2.
Okay. Well, maybe Dallas.
Okay.
If Dallas gets number 1, then I might think this whole thing is rigged. I already think it's rigged based off of last year. Um, so you already know I have a very very bad relationship with the lottery. I'm telling you, it
Sure.
goes really really bad because Wizards fans, we already know we had a 50% chance of getting Wembanyama and we didn't. So yeah, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. Is there a team that you feel like deserves the number 1 pick?
Like I said, in between
Yeah.
Washington, Sacramento, Chicago, or Brooklyn, in
Okay.
no particular order.
Then I guess the last question that I would have is, um, let's just say, like I said, I don't feel that way, but let's say that they decide to rig this year's draft. If you're, Adam Silver and you're like, all right, we're rigging the draft. Who are you giving the number 1 pick to?
Dallas.
Dallas? Okay.
Yeah, I'm giving Cooper Flag his partner.
What about Golden State?
Mm, I don't like that. And
Like, you know what I mean? Like if you were to like if you're Adam Silver and like let's rig the draft, let's give the Warriors like the number 1 pick.
okay,
See,
but
see what it looks like.
but here's the thing. I don't think getting DeBonsa or Peterson or
Hmm.
whoever they decide would decide to pick, does that
Hmm.
really extend the window? Does that really make them like a top team in the West?
Probably not, but it's more so like at the very least, worst case scenario, like you're better than what you would be. And then like best case scenario, you're really good. And then even after Steph is gone, you're not as bad as you would be if you just had like the 11th pick.
Yeah, that is
You know what
true.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like say if they like whoever the 11th pick is could still be good because this is supposed to be a deep draft, but it wouldn't be the same as getting, DeBonsta or Peterson or whomever,
Yeah.
right? But so that's probably what it would look like. But yeah, but like so if you're rigging the draft, you wouldn't give OKC the number 1 pick.
No.
You wouldn't?
No. I'd give it to
Because like
Dallas.
the case you could make is that you just say, all right, we're already going on a crusade against tanking. So what if we rigged it to give it to the team that is, like putting in the work, and winning the title?
I mean, you could do that, but it's like
Yeah.
I feel like if the Dallas normally when people think of rigging, they think of storylines, and I think the better storyline is giving Cooper Flag a duo who's also a number 1 pick back to back. Like
Right.
that would be
Yeah.
insane. That what kind of luck in quotes would that be?
Right.
It just
You
sounds like
trade-
another reward for getting rid of Luka.
Yeah. Like you trade Luca and then you basically traded Luca for like Cooper Flag and then whomever you get number 1 overall.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah. So like, yeah, exactly. That one would probably, I hadn't even really thought about that one.
Yeah.
Like, because I know other people have thought about it. I just hadn't thought about it as much. Like since they traded AD, I just hadn't thought about Dallas quite as much, other than when Flag won Rookie of the Year. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how this goes. Do you have a prediction for who gets the number 1 pick? I guess it doesn't really matter because it's just lottery luck. But like, do you have a prediction? I think we did it last year. I think I thought the Spurs would get the number 1 pick, and they jumped up to 2, so I was close. And then I remember we like kind of almost offhand kind of said the funniest outcome or craziest one would be Dallas getting the number 1 pick. And I think we even had somebody in the comments. This was like back when the Mavs traded for AD, like during the season. It was like they have a point something % chance of getting Cooper Flag, or something like that, and they may need that. And then it's like, oh wow, they actually got it. So
Yeah.
we actually ended up getting the craziest outcome.
Yeah.
But like, do you have a prediction for number 1?
I think Brooklyn gets number 1.
Okay.
Point blank period. No, there's no logic or reason or explaining that one.
Okay.
What about you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was probably gonna lean. I think I feel like I'm gonna go with Brooklyn
Really?
as well. That's kind of
Okay.
No, actually, no. Honestly, I'm gonna go with Indiana.
Really? You think Indy gets number 1? No shot. If they get number 1, then honestly, that's another freaking that's another rigging situation, I would feel like.
But you could make the case that like, hey, they were right there. Almost could have won the title, lost Halliburton, and like, yeah, they were horrible, but they might have a real chance, to stay alive. So that I guess, and then like that's the other question is like, so do you think Indiana keeps the pick? Do you think that they drop to 5 or 6?
I think they keep the pick.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you think it drops,
Yeah.
but they stay in the top 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, fair enough. And then I guess just a couple of questions. So like, if you're Memphis and you get the number 1 pick, does that automatically put you on trade Ja watch? Like, or does it not really matter?
Yeah, I'd
Like,
kickstart.
would you keep Ja if you got the number 1 pick?
I'd kickstart the rebuild.
Okay.
I think the era's over, right? All the remnants of the Ja era are pretty much gone, right? You don't have Triple J, you don't have Dylan Brooks, right? So there's not a whole lot of exactly no Bane as well. So there's not a whole lot of remnants of that team.
Mm-hmm.
So say you pick AJ, let AJ cook at that point.
You got Ty Jerome, you got AJ DeBonsta, so there you go.
Yeah, top 5 duo already, but I think there's potential for that to happen if they do get number 1, but I doubt they get number 1.
Yeah, because that's really the question. Because there's a couple of teams where I feel like if you jumped up to number 1, that would kind of like start to like make you feel like, all right, we got something where like we could actually reconfigure our roster a little bit over here. Like if you're the Hawks and you don't get the lottery luck, like they're projected, I think at 7. So like if they just stayed at 7, like would you trade the pick or would you keep it?
Mm, Probably keep
Guess
it.
it depends on who's out there, but
I'd
like
probably keep it.
okay. And then say like Miami jumps up to number 1. Like would you still be in on the Giannis train? Would you trade the number 1 pick for Giannis?
No,
Okay.
no. I'm building it out the mud. I'll maybe move Tyler Hero, something like
Okay.
that. And
Mhm.
obviously not with the number one pick in ball, but I'd move Tyler Hero and draft whoever.
Yeah. Because that's also another guy, which shocker, right, to watch, like in the summer, right? Because and we'll probably talk about it more once the offseason goes around, but like that's a guy where like the rumors are going to start heating up, where there's going to, I think there's going to be multiple teams where I don't know if he automatically is going to go to the team that he wants to go to, or at the very least he's going to have to open up his list, whatever it is, right? Because a couple of teams that we thought maybe they could get it, like might not happen, but
Yeah.
either way, um, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about all the things we talked about in terms of the series and the lottery, because I'm really excited to see what happens with the lottery. I really want to know
Me too.
who ends up getting the top picks, just because I think it's usually a lot of fun. There's always fireworks, there's always conspiracies and everything. And then shout out to everybody who's joined in on all the live streams we've done so far in the postseason as well. So again, go to at the OPT podcast for more content and updates. And then also like and subscribe to the channel to help the channel grow. We appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.